telling of the Ten Commandments, because Ten Commandments appear twice, once in the book of Exodus when they're at Sinai, and that's when Moses told the first generation the Ten Commandments. Well, here in Deuteronomy, he's going to tell the first generation's children the Ten Commandments, and some of the examples in it get applied a little bit more to settled agrarian life versus the nomadic kind of group they were right after Sinai, where they're still going to be living in the wilderness for a while. Hopefully, what I'm hoping we can do is go through these kind of slowly. I only plan to go through the first two commandments today because there's a lot of depth to these. They're probably one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful individual set of laws in world history. And a testament to that is that I know in a lot of schools and government buildings, there's argument right now as to whether you can have the Ten Commandments or not, but it's still pretty amazing that there is an argument being had. In some places still, some government offices still have them hanging up. Like these were given over 3,000 years ago, and here we are still putting this law code in buildings all around the world. So America is not the only country that recognizes and respects these commandments. So very important, not just to Israelite history, but to Christian history and world history. We'll start with a little bit of background real quick before we open with prayer. So where we were the last couple weeks, Moses has finished his history of God guiding the Israelites through the wilderness and up to where they are now, on the other side of the Jordan, ready to cross over into the Promised Land. And through that history, Moses has demonstrated the multiple ways in which God has led Israel through the wilderness, led them through battles with their enemies, led them through all the kinds of hardships that they faced in the wilderness, and how God was faithful to them through all that time. And in response to his provision and his protection, it only makes sense that the Israelites respect the commandments and follow the commandments which God is giving to them. As we were closing out with last week, Papap was talking about the cities of refuge and how as they're going to be crossing it onto the other side of the Jordan, 2.5 tribes said, we really like the land here for our animals. We want to stay on the east bank of the Jordan. And what Moses and God decide is that they're going to be allowed to stay there. They'll get their portion of the land on the eastern side of the Jordan. But to make sure that they're doing their part for claiming the promised land for the Israelites, their men are going to have to lead across the Jordan, and they're not going to be allowed to return to the east side of the Jordan until they finish taking the promised land and the other tribes are able to settle. So they're going to be getting ready for that in a little bit. And what Moses does, since people are going to be staying on that side of the Jordan, the women, the children, maybe those too old to fight, they're going to be staying on the east side of the Jordan. They're not going to cross over to the promised land. So he establishes the cities of refuge. And those are the cities where if someone accidentally kills someone without malice, they're allowed to run to that city, and until the death of the high priest, if they stay within the walls of that city, they're protected from the blood avenger, the family member who, under the law, is allowed to seek the death penalty for them, and in some cases be the one to execute the death penalty. So they establish those cities of refuge and kind of establish basically the legal system, because there's going to be thousands and thousands of people staying on that side of the Jordan. They need to have the law set up before Moses, Moses isn't going to be entering the promised land, but before the rest of the leadership that comes after him is going to be going with the rest of the people across the Jordan to take it. So that's what brings us up to what we're going to see in chapter 5 and on through, I believe it's like 20 or 29, is going to be restating the law for application for a settled people. The commandments themselves, let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this day that you've blessed us with and this morning you've given to us. We pray you'll bless our study of the Word this morning to learn from it and to understand how to apply it to our lives. We're thankful for this day and your blessings. And it's in your Son's name we pray and give you thanks. Amen. All right. So we're going to be reading in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Today I expect we'll be covering the first 10 verses. But just to give a little bit more background on the Ten Commandments and their place within history, I already mentioned a little bit of this, how impactful it is that we still put the Ten Commandments on prominent display 3,000 plus years after they were first given. According to the Jewish Virtual Library, which is kind of I think they're based in Israel. It's a library over there that they run. They store online documents, online information about Jewish history, Israelite history, even beyond what we would have in the Bible or even in the Old Testament. They listed that the Ten Commandments are considered the first 10 of the 613 recognized commandments of the Old Testament. The 613 number is a little difficult because there's some phrases where is that one commandment, is that two commandments that he's given? Some verses have multiple commandments within one verse. Some commandments are spread out over multiple verses. But there is, since about 300 AD, or excuse me, 3rd century AD, so that'd be the 200s. Since about then, the Jewish rabbis have had this consensus that there's 613 commandments, and it starts with the 10 Commandments. Jesus saw the Ten Commandments as quite important. When he was talking to the rich young ruler, and he's grilling him on like, well, have you kept this commandment, this commandment, this commandment? I believe it's 5 different commandments he references, and they're all from the 10 Commandments. And something else that we often teach about when we're referencing the 10 Commandments is that with the exception of the Sabbath being not as rigidly repeated in the New Testament, it's said to Christians that it's good for us to take breaks, but that Christ is now the Lord of the Sabbath. He's our Sabbath rest. And so that's the one command that didn't literally get repeated in the New Testament. But the other 9 in different forms, whether it's Paul talking about, he talks about idolatry and meat sacrifice to idols. Jesus and Paul both have plenty to say on sexual immorality, adultery, things of that nature. All of the other 9 commandments are repeated, and very often the bar on them is raised for Christians throughout the New Testament. So they're very important to us as well. That leads us to chapter 5, verse 1. Can we get someone to read the first verse there for us? All right, Mom.
Then Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I am speaking today in your hearing, that you may learn them and observe them carefully.
Thank you. So Moses is calling the people together to teach the law. And that kind of brings us to one of the first things, which we haven't touched on too much, but what's the purpose of teaching the law? Why do we teach the law to other people, to those younger than us? Sorry?
So they can learn it.
Yeah, so they can learn it.
Yeah.
That's one reason given here. Here we're given 2 reasons. The first is so that they learn them, so that they know what the commandments are. And the second is that so that those learning the commandments would obey the commandments. It doesn't make much sense to have, or it's not helpful to know all the details about the commandments, but then never apply them to our lives.
Well, you also mentioned that when they're reviewed in the New Testament, the bar is raised. We don't just follow it because God said no, that the commandments are given because it's something either about his nature, what he wants to see, what is good for us. So, if when you're learning what not to do, you're also learning about God's nature and how to be like him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, following the law teaches us about God and uh, about becoming more like him and more like his nature. The same subject in James chapter 1, verse 22 to 25, it says, "But prove yourselves doers of the word, not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. But one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does." So here, when James is talking about the law, he's not specifically talking about the law of Moses itself. He's talking about God's general law, all that God has revealed to us in the Old and the New Testament about who he is. That's the example we're supposed to follow. And the way that we know that we're following what God told us to do is by studying his word, and we use it like a mirror. We take our behavior, take our activity, and compare it to what God wrote in here. And James says if we're following it, if we're studying the word, we're going to know what we look like and what versus what we're supposed to look like. If we don't do that, if we aren't learning the law, then we're not going to be able to obey the law either, because we're going to, as he says, forget what we look like. We're going to forget the standard we're supposed to be following. So learning the law is important to obeying the law, and that's the ultimate goal of teaching the law to others, to the next generation, is hoping that they will follow in God's footsteps in seeking to be and act more like him. Next, can we get a volunteer for verses 2 through 5? Deuteronomy 5, 2 through 5. All right, Dad?
The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain, out of the midst of the fire, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time, to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain.
Thank you. So in this passage, Moses is singling out how the law is going to apply to the Israelites. Now, for those who don't know, Horeb, basically just the same thing as Mount Sinai. It's sometimes called Mount Horeb. It's just a different way that, or different languages that can refer to it. Different names for the same place. Here Moses makes a kind of interesting statement. He says the Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us. As best I can tell from looking at some other versions of it, what's being gotten at there is kind of saying he didn't only make this covenant with our fathers. It wasn't just a covenant to be made with them and no one else. He's saying the covenant that was given at Sinai, because it was given to the previous generation as well. He's saying it's one that's supposed to extend on to their descendants. It's supposed to apply to the Israelites hearing it in Deuteronomy, the second generation, and it's going to apply to the Israelite nation up until such time as the old covenant is fulfilled. Yeah.
Could it just be saying that he didn't make the Mosaic covenant with like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the people up until the time of Sinai?
I think that's another possibility, but you have to figure out how it's working in with the previous generation that definitely was their fathers and definitely would have had the covenant made with them. So that's why I'm thinking it was more about saying it wasn't only with them. It could be that it's a new thing as well, but I don't know. It would have applied to at least one generation of their fathers. So that's a slight
Yeah, I would
slight
just
difficulty with
read it
that.
as those who were already passed away before the time of Sinai.
Yeah, like Abraham and
Yeah.
Isaac, patriarchs, etc. That's the other understanding of it that I found. But the ultimate important part of it is the second part of it. Moses is highlighting to them that the covenant and the commands being given very much apply to the Israelites today. That's what's important
So
for
you
them.
could supply the word only, not only with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant.
I'm pretty sure I saw another
Other
translation.
versions.
I think me on it now. Yeah. So if maybe I'm mistaken on that. I don't know. Hold on. I can pull up my ESV now. Give me a moment. Five, 3. Okay, so ESV's, not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord made not this, in this KJV, the Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us, who are all of us here alive this day. Okay, here the even us is italicized. Maybe that was supplied in KJV. Okay, I may be wrong about that.
Okay, so back in chapter 4:37, he said he loved their fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them and brought you out in his sight with his mighty power out of Egypt. So that would be reference to the patriarchs, pretty close by.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that makes more sense. All right, we'll go with that then. Okay, so forget the first thing I said. It's probably referring to the patriarchs and that the covenant being made at Sinai was not applied to them, but it was applied to the Israelite people. And then as part of the Israelite nation, this covenant is also being applied to their descendants. Verse 4, the Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain from the midst of the fire. This is a reference back to Exodus and when they're up on the mountain. They're kind of face to face with the glory of God, and the Israelites are terrified of all of it. If you remember, when he comes down from the mountain, Moses' face is glowing, and it's shining so brightly from his encounter with God that the Israelites want him to put a veil over his face because they can't bear being face to face with such glory. And I've mentioned before, it's a good lesson for what really happens when you really encounter God, really understand who he is as you realize your unworthiness to approach him. Some ways, there's almost a sense of unworthiness we should feel in terms of prayer, but we have a mediator who takes our requests to the Father on our behalf, and it's because of Jesus that we're able to effectively pray and communicate with God. And also the evidence that and I've said this before because it's sometimes a common thing, especially in like more emotional Christian circles, but people say they have encounters with angels and it's such a wonderful thing. Generally means that something isn't right with their experience because every example in the Bible of someone encountering encountering angels or the angel of the Lord, they're just absolutely terrified. And the first thing the angel says on every occasion is, do not be afraid. So it's a terrifying thing to be face to face with the glory of God, and that's what Moses is reminding them of here. Because when the law is being given, they're going to learn all about right and wrong, and what you really learn when you study the law is just how wrong you are all the time. Similar to how I was just wrong about verse 3. The more you learn, the more appreciative we should be for God's grace, because as we study the law, we learn we are not worthy to approach God. We've broken all of the commandments. I shouldn't say all the commandments, because we haven't, at least I don't think anyone here has ever actually murdered anybody, like physically.
You never know.
Yeah, never know. You don't have to tell me now. Don't worry. You don't have to confess it. But we've broken many of the commandments, and a lot of the common ones we break rather frequently. So that Moses is reminding them of a little bit of that, how he mediated for them, and that's a foreshadowing of how Christ is going to mediate for us, because we can't bear to stand face, not like literally face to face, because God wasn't literally face to face at the mountain. Even Moses wouldn't have survived that. But to have that kind of direct, close encounter, to have to deal with God one-on-one, we're not going to be able to do it. We need a mediator. So that's why God let Moses do that for the Israelites. That was one of the jobs he gave to Moses. And for us, we have a better mediator, Christ, who does that on our behalf. And so that brings us up to the Ten Commandments themselves. We can start with the first commandment. Can we get someone to read chapter 5, verses 6 through 7? All right, Landra?
And he said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me.
Thank you. So there's two parts in the first commandment, and the first part's going to apply to most of the others as well. But the first part of it is he gives a justification for the commandment, and then he gives the commandment himself. Now, what's the justification? Why is God saying they should be following this commandment?
To remind them?
Kind of. What is he reminding them specifically of is the question.
He starts out by announcing who he is and what he's done for them.
Yes.
And implied there is, because of these things, I have the authority to command you.
Yeah. So he's given them, in the previous 4 chapters, he gave them the long-form history of why they should listen to the entire book of Deuteronomy. But the people memorizing the Ten Commandments in the future, not many of them are going to be memorizing all of the previous 4 verses. So I'll get you in a moment. God's giving them a shorthand reminder here. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. Those 2 things are going to be memorized with the first commandment. And that's going to be the upfront reminder. Why do we obey this? Well, because the one who set us free from slavery in Egypt, he told us this is how we're supposed to live. And because he's the one who gave us our freedom, who gave us all that we have, we are in a position to do nothing except to obey it.
How did he get them out of Egypt? With all those miracles, he is letting them know exactly how much power and authority he has. He's giving his title, and he is speaking to them in a commanding way. Absolutely authoritative.
And mentioning the miracles coming out of Egypt is also interesting, because we see throughout their time in the wilderness, whenever they're coming up to different peoples, that the other nations have almost always heard of how God brought them out of Egypt and brought them through the Red Sea and defeated Pharaoh's army. That was one of the most formidable, if not the most formidable army in the region at that time. And to be set free from that army chasing them without really fighting a battle, news of that's going to spread like wildfire. So it wasn't only Israel who heard about and knew about that, but also the nations around them. Did you have a hand up? No? Okay. So,
I'm cooking an idea.
okay, we'll let them cook. So that's the justification that God gives to them. And it kind of foreshadows an interesting paradox of Christianity. So Paul talks a lot about the parity between the Israelites. They were set free from bondage in Egypt. I think it's in 1 Corinthians 10 or 2 Corinthians 10, one of the Corinthians. He talks about how we've been set free from sin in kind of the same way, and then he'll pair passing through the Red Sea with baptism, and how going through that and coming up out of the water, that's the time when Israel was set free. That's the time when we're set free from sins, when we become Christians. Now, I say it's an interesting paradox because what was it that we know Israel was being set free from sin, but what were they going to be set free to do? What was it they were going to be doing once they got out the other side? Were they going to be just serving themselves, serving nothing? No, they were going to be serving the Lord. So they went from one master to another. That's one of the interesting things about freedom in Christianity, is it's not just we're like, in some ethereal sense, free to do whatever we want, to follow God. And that's a good thing for us, because when we're following God, He's the one who established nature. He established how we ought to live. So when we're living as He tells us to, it's better for us, because it's like using something for its intended purpose in the way it's intended to be used. Like if you're using a drill for either drilling a hole or putting a screw into something, that's what it's intended for. You don't take the motor on a drill and use it to replace a car engine or hammer a nail. It's not designed to be used that way. It's not going to be very effective, and it's going to hurt the drill and destroy it rather quickly. Now, one might be tempted to think, well, why can't we just be free? Well, if we just look to nature in itself and who we are, we should recognize that as created finite beings, we're bound by things that we cannot control. So we're going to be subject to something. That some things that we're bound to that we don't get to control: the need to eat, the need to drink water, the need to sleep. Those are like three of the most basic things that we always have to do. And if we try to set ourselves free from those things, we're not going to live very long. Without water, you're probably going to die in about 3 days, if not sooner. So we can't just choose to not do things and be completely free from things. It would destroy us. What we're being set free from, and what the Israelites were being set free from, is a harsh and destructive master, versus what Jesus says in Matthew and in the Gospels. He says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's because when you're serving Christ, you're living in the way that we're designed to live, and so it's going to be better and healthier for us over the long run. Instead of destroying us, it's going to lead to eternal life. So, applying this to the Israelites themselves, because God set them free, the Israelites owe Him their freedom within the boundaries that He set, and it's because He's set them free for a purpose. He set them free to follow and worship Him, and in the terms of the Israelite nation, one of the particular services they're predestined for is they're the people that the Messiah is going to come from. They're the descendants of Abraham, through whom the whole world is going to be blessed. So it's kind of interesting to see they have not just their individual purpose, that they're being set free to obey God and follow His law in the place that He's given to them. They're also going to be the ones bringing in the Messiah. Now, the substance of the first commandment itself is this declaration that you shall have no other gods before me. Now, what we call syncretism was a major problem in the ancient world. Syncretism is the idea of trying to have like multiple religions, multiple gods at the same time. And many of the cultures around the Israelites were syncretist, polytheistic. They had a lot of different gods, and they would try to serve them at the same time. That doesn't go too well. Because if you take just like Greek mythology, for example, one example of a polytheistic religion, the polytheistic religions tend to multiply gods over time, because if you find some other god you think you're supposed to be following, well, what's one more? Just add them onto the list of ones that you already sacrificed to. And one of the big problems you see in their stories is that their gods were always warring with each other. They're always having their own conflicts. And it's what Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 5. You can't serve two masters. You're either going to love one and hate the other. You'll be devoted to one or despise the other. You're only going to be able to choose one and to serve one, because two gods of the same level, they're eventually going to conflict with each other. God doesn't want the Israelites to be like this. And that's one of the problems with how they were instituting Baal worship. Some of them may have stopped claiming to worship God, but some of them were doing Baal and God, or Asherah and God, or Asherah and Baal and God. They, like the nations around them, would start to multiply gods, and then your service is being pulled in all different directions. Eventually, you're just spiritually pulling yourself apart. He wants them to serve him and him alone, and so that's why he makes it the first priority commandment. Jesus says, very similarly, this is the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God. Here we see it expressed as, you shall have no other gods before me. There's nothing else that we should serve before God. And this applies both to the Israelites then, and it applies to Christians now. The next, chapter 5, verses 8 through 10. This is the second commandment. Can we get someone to read those three verses for us? Anders, thank you. 8 through 10.
You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers, to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments.
Thank you. This is one of the places where you see a little bit of why 613 commandments exactly is a little difficult. This is one commandment, but there's multiple things being commanded here. Number one is that you shall not worship or serve idol. Excuse me. One is that you shall not make an idol. Number two is that you shall not worship an idol. So there's two different things, because if it just said you shall not make an idol, well, they might think, well, what if someone else makes it? Maybe I can worship it then. As God's like, no, you can't make it. Not only that, you can't worship it either. But we still consider it one commandment, because it's talking about what is the relationship between Israelites and idolatry. The relationship is that there should be no relationship. They shouldn't be there at all. Now, there's a couple different classifications, and God's very detailed here with what he's saying they can't make graven images of. He says nothing in heaven, nothing on earth. That basically just means everything. But he's being very clear and specifying it to them. Like, I don't want you making anything, because think and the things on earth is almost a little bit more important here, because most of the types of idols that the different cultures around them would be making would incorporate some kind of man and animal element. If you've ever seen pictures of ancient Egyptian idols, they're almost always some kind of human with the head of a different animal. So I think like Osiris is like a man with some bird or an owl. You could correct me on this if I'm wrong, Joe. She's our little Egyptology expert. Then
Horus has an
Anubis.
eagle's head.
Yeah, Anubis is probably a little more recognizable. It's a man with a jackal's head.
There's multiple bird heads.
Yeah, a lot of leopard heads as well.
I don't know about leopard heads, but there's like the god of wisdom has like the head of I think it's a crane.
Okay. I don't know why they thought
Then they
cranes were so wise, but that's the kind of ridiculous things that happens when you serve idols. And think about, it kind of makes, first of all, whatever you're worshiping is kind of subhuman at that point. You've not only taken something that was equal with you, another man, you've now made it less than a man. And that's what you're now calling your God. And that's because within idolatry is very often an attempt to manipulate God. You have this statue and you think if you do certain things to it, well, it has to do certain things for me. And that's not how we're supposed to relate with God at all. Anything that we often talk about in the offering thought, we give back to God because we recognize He already gave to us when we asked, and He's either said yes or no to that or wait. But our gifts to Him aren't to get Him, should never be to get Him to do something for us. It should be in response to what He's already done.
Yeah, and with this particular command, there's a lot to this that you have to decide. For example, I think typically Christians don't have a problem with making statues if they're historical people, historical characters, representative animals, as long as it's not intended for purposes of worship. And so we've pretty freely done in the tabernacle and the temple. The bronze sea was resting on 12 oxen, and they had the cherubim. They put images of that on the curtains. So there were various images used in the tabernacle and in the temple itself. Now you could say those are just authorized by God and everything else was off limits. That may have been. I'm not sure to what degree they prohibited, the making of any images or drawings. With Islam, they won't make any images of people at all, and their artwork reflects that. It's all geometric shapes and things like that. And then, and I think in modern Judaism, I think they tend not to, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. Well, I remember in Jesus' day even, they used the Tetragrammaton because they did not want to write down what they knew was the name of God for fear that it would get destroyed by something or eaten up. They saw they believed that would be disrespectful. It's not, I can understand the reasoning behind it. It's not something explicitly said in the Old Testament. I can understand why they would want to do that.
I noticed that their seals, they're all symbolic. Like you find a clay seal from an ancient king or scribe. It's
usually fruit
like
or
a
plant.
palm leaves or plants, things like that.
Yeah.
I think that the tabernacle and therefore the temple by extension, those were just commanded because they were specifically commanded not to, when they made an altar, they were not to use an iron tool to chip off the stones. They were just supposed to pile them up, therefore they could not accidentally make a shape in it. It was just, the rock was piled up.
Yeah. And kind of getting to something I had planned for in a little bit was the question of iconography. And I did, because we're getting close on time, we might not get to finish all of what I wanted to say on that. I do think it's important to mention with the second half, the general way this is applied to Christians throughout the New Testament. And I think really just the words here apply quite well. You shall not worship any idol. We don't have the same problem as Dad mentioned of making statues to fall down before and bow before. I mean, you don't. Well, I say that
Yeah,
they're now putting
it
up
does
large
happen.
ones in Hindu areas around Texas.
That's what I was thinking.
But
we should, someone should start a movement where we contact them and ask them to consider removing them, because I don't understand the purpose of them putting them up, because they know it's offensive to 3 different religions and it's outside of our culture.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like a sign of superiority that they're trying to like shove in people's
Yeah.
faces.
But that bit aside,
And the Satanists putting up their stupid statues.
that bit aside for a moment, it's still important for us here to realize it is possible to make anything an idol, even something that you haven't made a statue towards. And the basic definition of it is putting anything else before God. If we could put sports above God. We're watching the game instead of being in church on Sunday. It could be letting work take all of our time, and or it could be family obligations. We can let things take precedent in our life over God. And we have to be on guard to make sure that doesn't happen. That's the general warning of how the second commandment is going to most prominently apply to Christians, because we aren't usually the ones making, like, say, I think it's called the Pieta, Michelangelo's statue of Mary holding Jesus. It's very beautiful. I think it's
the most beautiful sculpture ever made. I do. It's
maybe
so good.
Maybe I can't think of one that would rival it off the top of my head for sure. But that is a hotly contested issue throughout Christian history. Is it wrong to make a painting or a statue of Jesus? And I think you did rightly identify the general position that we've held in this church. I mean, as you can see, there's like a stained glass in the back hallway. There's like a stained glass-ish. The children coming to Jesus. We have, I think, a similar painted replica in one of the nursery rooms. And that's something very common you see in church nurseries throughout the country, is the story of Jesus saying, "Let the little children come to me," because I think it's a great story. And Jesus, because he's a historical figure who existed in history, I don't see a problem with tasteful statues and paintings that are not meant for worship, but can be good reminders of the story itself, can simply just seek to glorify God in their beauty and their respect. And I did look it up just because I was interested. The oldest known depiction of Jesus is from 235 AD. I believe it's in a catacomb. And it is the story of the paralytic man being lowered through the roof by his 4 friends and Jesus healing him. And it's kind of funny. Their depiction of the bed is like this cot thing that has like full 4 legs and a full frame. So the guy is actually picking up like what looks like almost a full frame twin-sized bed. I just found that's interesting. That's what
Probably
200 years out they considered to be what?
Probably from original.
Yeah, probably from the original mattress factory. The original mattress factory. But the issue with it, and I'll try to end on this, is there has been some messy gray area with iconography and what Catholics often call veneration. They'll be praying in front of statues, and it's not just them. The Orthodox will do it as well sometimes. They'll be praying in front of statues. They might say they're not praying to the statue. They'll light candles and put that in front of the statue. Some forms of veneration include kissing the statues It's like you can't see in the heart of a person. You can't always see how their worship is being directed. But those are very similar practices to what idolaters prior to the first century would have been doing. They obviously would have been doing much more than that, but those are things that they would have been doing.
The Buddhists also, when they pray, they kneel in front of a little statue of Buddha, burning incense.
Yeah, in my mind and my advice is it is far too close for comfort. It's a messy area that I think Christians ought to avoid. I still find it interesting they have to come up with some alternate word to describe what they're doing to say that it's not worship. They call it veneration.
And very telling, they combine what we call the first and second commandment, they combine it into one.
Yes, they do combine them into one, and then they split the 10th commandment in half. And it's to try to smooth over the graven images and worshiping idols issues by saying it's
graven images of something that's not God.
Yeah. So there's some problems with that. It's something that Christians ought to avoid. Now, there was some more in verses 9 through 10 on both the justice and the mercy of God, but we are out of time to cover that this morning. So hopefully we'll get to pick up on that next week. But we'll go ahead and close out with prayer. Father in heaven, we're grateful for this day that you've given to us to come and study from your word. Help us to worship you in spirit and in truth, and to make sure that you're the first thing in our lives, nothing else before you. And it's your son's name we pray and give you thanks. Amen.